Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Molly Brady. I'm the LF focal point at RTI International, working on USAID's Act to End NTDs East project. My co-facilitator of this symposium is Dr. Alison Krentel. She's an associate professor at University of Ottawa. And we welcome you to this session about what's next in never treatment in MDA. So a few housekeeping notes first. These meetings are being live streamed, and they'll be recorded for later viewing. The recordings will be available about a week after the final day of the COR-NTD meetings. These live streams will pause when we break into smaller groups for discussion, and then the video will come back when we report out from the small groups. Also, just please take a moment to note the exits around here, and if we need to evacuate or there's an emergency, please remain calm. So why did we bring up never treatment as an issue in the first place? I think in 2007, there was maybe one of the first articles that was published that noted that people who had taken 2 or more doses of MDA had significantly lower microfilariasis and angiogenemia rates. This came out of Egypt. And this was something that began to be noted over the years in many places, in many programs, and many research. In 2009, an article about the Haiti program noted that systematic noncompliance may have played a role in recrudescence of infection. And then when we moved on a little bit later, in 2016, an article was published that looked at interventions to address never treatment and found that they do work. A change in compliers from 79% at baseline up to 90% after the intervention. And then finally to note that this has also been part of the modelers' work. In 2018, an article was published that found that a low coverage in combination with a high proportion of people never participating in MDA can make it virtually impossible to reach elimination thresholds. So very clearly an issue, and in 2020, WHO in the weekly Epi Record Global Program report did note that systematics noncompliance was a risk to LF elimination. So starting in December 2020 through May 2021, under the iCHORDs community of practice, a task team was formed to look at this issue. And then under the COR-NTD forum, a set of research link sessions were held virtually. And this was done to consolidate current learnings, but also to agree on terminology. And this is where the term never treatment came from. It was thought to be a simpler term, easier to translate, and something that didn't put the onus on participating on the communities. Part of these research links sessions proposed incorporating a measure of never treatment into existing data collection. This started quite quickly and is still going on now. The iCHORDs community of practice put together some standard operating procedures on use of that question. And then in last year at COR and at a Gates meeting only about never treatment in Seattle, we heard back from programs and researchers that said, yeah, we were able to use this indicator and collect this data, but it'd be really great if we had a whole toolkit. And so PAHO and WHO said, okay, we can help develop this never treatment toolkit that would combine the SOPs, talk a little bit more about data analysis, and bring in other important things about how to respond to NTDs. So this development is ongoing. You'll hear a little bit more about this from Jonathan King later today. At the same time, as I mentioned, the NTD Modeling Consortium was looking how best to incorporate measures of never treatment into their models, and we'll hear more about that this afternoon as well. And then finally, just to note that COR-NTD and others have been working on operational research studies around never treatment, and we'll hear about 2 of those later today. So what have we accomplished thus far? As I mentioned, there's quite a bit of ongoing research and probably even more than I've listed there. Programs have been able to incorporate this indicator into over 100 LF pre-transmission assessment surveys and over 140 coverage evaluation surveys. And These coverage evaluation surveys have looked at LF, but also trachoma, onco, and schisto in some cases. The modeling consortium has published journal articles and has a couple under review. And then, as I mentioned, we have the draft WHO toolkit that is coming out with further guidance, and also ongoing discussions with partners like Gavi, who is looking at this through the lens of zero dose to see how we can best collaborate with them. So a few key points about what we've learned since 2020. As I mentioned, we found that it's feasible to use this indicator, and realizing kind of the complexity of never treatment. When we look at it, it's not just one level of never treatment that's going to act the same everywhere. It depends on the baseline prevalence of the area, the drug combination used, the overall coverage. And it's also very complex in terms of who is never treated. It's a very context-specific issue. It can change even by site within a district. People miss MDA for very many different reasons, and the people that are missing MDA are also different. But we are starting to see that there are certain groups that remain hard to reach, migrants and urban dwellers, for example. And finally, and this was discussed a lot in Seattle, but there are ways to address these challenges. Different national programs have found various ways to help reach people for the first time. And among that, definitely flexibility in how we're distributing the drugs and how we're doing social mobilization is key. So there are certainly questions that remain, and we hope that today, this is what we can work together to figure out. What are these key questions? What are the priority ones, and where can we do further work around this? Some are definitely still in the area of measurement. How can programs most easily analyze never treatment data at all levels? And how do we help programs interpret this data and figure out when to take action? As well as what guidance can we give on how to respond? If you find a level of never treatment that's concerning, what are the promising practices around addressing that? And how can we integrate and learn from other global health programs? So today, first with our presentations that are coming up, we really want to learn how people who are never treated affect NTD elimination goals and how this can be mitigated. And then in the small groups, we want to talk more about, are there places where we could pilot the WHO Never Treated Toolkit or parts of it, and how might we evaluate that pilot? And then secondly, in the small groups, to look at what are the current evidence gaps, what are the priority ones, and are there places we could do further research to address these? And then finally, what are the key learnings that we are finding, and how can we apply or translate these learnings to other disease programs, not just LF, not just PC NTDs or even NTDs, but in general, other global health programs. So we have 5 speakers today. Our first speaker is going to be Professor Deidre Hollingsworth. She's an infectious disease epidemiologist who uses mathematical models and statistical analyses to study the evolution and transmission dynamics of infectious diseases with the aim of informing the design of more effective control and elimination interventions. She also leads the NTD Modeling Consortium, which is an international network of neglected tropical disease modelers. Our second presentation will be by Dr. Rajiv Tandon, who's the health director of RTI International India, and he has worked in the public health and nutrition sector for 4 decades in India. And he's currently the PI of a COR-NTD funded study on migration and never treatment in India. And then next, Dr. Musa Sangare is a clinical investigator at the ICER Mali and is involved in clinical trial implementation and field-based research. Much of his work and his team's work focuses on strategies to improve MDA, particularly among people living in vulnerable circumstances. So he is currently the PI of a COR-NTD funded study on migrant and mobile populations in Mali. Then we'll go to a coffee break, and after the coffee break, we'll return to a presentation by Dr. Faraja Layamuya, who is currently the LF focal point at the Tanzania Neglected Tropical Diseases Control Program at the Ministry of Health. She has a lot of experience in field investigations for infectious diseases, including outbreak-prone diseases, vaccine-preventable diseases, and NTDs. And she will be talking about some work with fishing communities in Tanzania. And then finally, Dr. Jonathan King, who is the lead of the Community and Primary Care-Based Interventions team in the NTD department at WHO Geneva, will give an update on the Never Treated toolkit. After those presentations, we'll have a bit of an interactive roving session where we'll have rotating breakout groups, one about piloting the Never Treatment toolkit, one about current evidence gaps, and one about key learnings. And we'll ask about 10 to 12 people to be in each group. We have 2 of each of these. We'll spend about 15 to 20 minutes in the first one talking about their thoughts and opinions, rotate to the second one for a slightly shorter time, and then the third one. If we have time, we'll have a quick report out and a session close. So we have a very packed agenda, and we're really excited that you're all with us today. And with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Hollingsworth for the first presentation.
Thank you very much, Molly, and thank you for including me in this journey over the last several years regarding these efforts to measure this very important phenomenon. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about some work that is now in 3 papers, one of which is published and the other 2 are under review, and I can share them with anybody who's interested. Work done in the modelling consortium across different groups, as we'll see. So we know that minimising the proportion of never treatment has been identified as a key factor in the success of an MDA programme. And how can modelling help us understand this is one of the questions I'll be talking about in this presentation. And we did various pieces of modelling initially, but really the stakeholders were really pushing us to answer these 2 questions. What level of never treat is too much to achieve programmatic goals? Is there a threshold amount of never treat? And so some of the slides I'll be talking about will be attempting to address that question in particular. And also what MDA coverage is needed for an acceptable level of individuals never being treated to achieve programmatic goals. So never treat arises partly through chance, partly through systematic reasons, and partly through the coverage of the programme. And how do those things trade off together? So I'm going to talk first about LF, and we think about LF dynamics as being quite slow. So in general, there's not a huge amount of reinfection between rounds of MDA. So let's consider a situation, first of all, where the people who are never treated, which are in the red box, have the same risk of infection as everybody else. So let's say we've got 1,000 people, that 100 are infected, and the target we want to get down to is just 1% prevalence, i.e. 10 people infected. But in the never treatment group alone, if they're just 10% of the population, we have 100 people of whom 10 are infected. So if we never treat that group, we can never get below this 1% threshold, okay? So depending how big your never treatment group is and how high prevalence is in the population in general, you're never going to get below your threshold. So that's a very simplified version of trying to calculate what the impact is of not reaching a certain proportion of the population. And Claudette Cura and Wilma Stoke have a paper looking at this in more detail, which I'll talk more about in a minute. But there's also a risk that infection may actually be more common in the never treated group. So there may be a reason why they're never treated, which is also associated with why they are more likely to be infected. So for example, they could be in an area which is hard to reach but maybe has more mosquitoes. And so if prevalence is actually higher in that group, then you may never reach your target prevalence that you're trying to get to. And then on top of that, if they're a source of infection for the rest of the population, they're also going to interfere with the progress of your program. So if they are the main source of infection for the rest of the population, so for example, mosquitoes are mainly biting them, but also biting some of the rest of the population, then it's going to be really critical to get to this group in order to reach your goals. But it's also important to note that reducing transmission across the whole population by vector control across the whole population can help mitigate this, provided that the people who don't access MDA also don't access your vector control. So correlations between these different effects can cause you big problems. And then there's the challenge of who's included in surveillance. So it's also possible that the people who are never treated are also not included in your surveillance, and this was the topic of Jess's paper, Jess Clark's paper in PLOS NTDs. So if you don't actually measure these people because they don't have access to your surveillance strategy, you can mask the underlying continuation of transmission whilst the observed prevalence in the rest of the population continues to decline. Once again, in theory, vector control across the whole population can mitigate this effect, providing that this group are also able to access the vector control interventions. Who is never treated is also dynamic. So it's a really useful concept, this idea that there's this proportion never treated, but as many people in this room know much better than I do, it's changing from round to round. And so these are some illustrations of data from, on the left, an LF program and then 2 onchocerciasis programs, and the full references are available, where they've used treatment registers to look at how many people have received 0, 1, 2, 3 rounds in the first plot, or 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 rounds in the far right-hand plot. And you can see it's not like there's a big group at 0 and everybody else is over at 4, or there's a big group at 0 and everybody else is over at 8. There's a real distribution of people who've received a certain number of treatments. And while we're never really going to be able to capture this in most settings, the Never Treat tool is a really powerful tool for measuring this first bar, and it's a really good indicator of how your program is going. There's also diverse drivers of why you've got this very, fairly flat distribution, for example, in the onchocerciasis program on the right. One of which is that people come in and out of your population, so I'm looking forward to the migration talk later. So let's get back to our stakeholders' question, which is, but is there a threshold level of never treat, which is important? So the researchers who worked on this question looked in particular after 5 rounds of MDA for LF for a TAS, and they defined the never treat population at that point in time. So after 5 rounds, what proportion of people have never been treated, and what impact does that have on the dynamics of the program? So we worked on different ways of presenting this result, but this is the one we came up with, and I want you to come with me, and if you have better suggestions, the group are also open to those. So on the top left-hand plot, let's see if I've got a pointer. No, okay. So look at this top left-hand plot, the coloured plot. And what we have is in every row, we have the proportion of people who are never treated. And it goes from it goes from zero at the top through to 25%, I think it is, at the bottom. And then left to right, I've got a average coverage across the rounds of 65, 80, and 90. And then what's inside the plot is how many years of treatment it's likely to take to reach below 1% prevalence in your population. And the 3 plots are baseline prevalence 10, 20, and 30. So let's start at the top. We have a baseline prevalence of 10%. If I have 65% coverage and nobody never treated, it'll take us, I actually can't read that from here, but I think it says 3 to 4 rounds, right? But as my proportion of never treated starts to get higher, as I go down the plot, the colours start to go red because it could potentially start to take us more than 10 years to reach our goal. Because now we have this pool of people who are never being treated, and no matter how many rounds we do, we're never going to get to them, and so we can't achieve our goal. If you have higher coverage, then you can't have very high proportions of never treat, which is why the colours stop partway down. But you're still affected by this proportion never treated. And then the next plot down, if I have a higher baseline prevalence, the never treat starts to go red quicker. At 10% never treat, I'm already starting to have quite a serious problem. If I've got 65% coverage, I've got a lot of red in that plot. And obviously at even higher prevalence, the bottom plot, then we really have a serious problem. And as I said, we're happy to share the paper with you. So there's not exactly a threshold level of never treat, which is a problem. But the higher your prevalence, the lower your coverage, the more problematic your never treat group is likely to be. Of course, this is kind of summary modelling, and we don't know all of the drivers of why people don't get treated. It's not an age-structured never treat. It's not a gender-structured never treat. But this gives an impression of the problem. So I'll wrap up by saying the never treat threshold depends on the region considered, the baseline endemicity, and the drug combination that's being administered. I didn't present here, but the group have also done an analysis for schistosomiasis, which we can also share with you. The MDA coverage needed to achieve elimination as a public health problem depends on all of these things and the never treat threshold. But obviously this is a simplified analysis. We didn't include the possible correlation between transmission risk and the probability of never being treated. There may be clustering in households. We didn't include age variation, and we didn't include the addition of vector control. But I hope that gives you an impression of the sorts of role that these individuals can play in obstructing the achievement of your program and the sorts of levels that start to become important. It can get important at quite low levels, 5 to 10%, depending on your transmission setting. And I'll stop there. I think I have a couple of minutes left for questions, if there are any. And if not, I shall pass on to my colleague. Thank you. Please, go ahead. Oh, sorry, there's a microphone just coming for you. Sorry, sir. Please start again. Thank you.
About 10 to 15% of people are systematic non-compliant. Below 5 years age, IDA is not administered. Pregnant women, severely ill, elderly population. Now, that leaves us with about 90% or 85 to 90% whom can be administered the IDA. Now, programs normally recommend DOTS. And in the reality, we have seen that DOTS is not possible because there's only 1 day assigned for MDA. Now, the question is how to achieve this high target, not to leave behind anyone. And then there are people who are engaged in agriculture. They go to the farms when the drug is being dispensed, or they are skilled workers or unskilled workers migrating out, and they can come back. And there is a hesitancy we have seen in drug dispensers talking to very elderly people, and because too many drugs to be given, administered. So all these issues compound this problem, in my opinion. This is just a comment that I wanted to make. I don't have a specific question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that will align with some of the experiences we're going to hear later on. Are there any other questions? Please, Luke.
Thank you for that comment, Dr. Kumar. I'd like to respond to that the definition of never treat that we used in the modeling was actually the proportion of eligible people, so technically eligible people over those 5 years. So we don't consider like the under fives in that definition. So it's maybe a little more feasible than it seems at first.
Thank you, Luke. There's one question over here, yeah.
Thank you very much. The motivation of people to take the medicine depends on the perception of the problem, which means in low prevalence settings, the problem may not be visible. So why people should get to be treated? Do you at all see the correlation between those never treated population and the low prevalence settings where there is no lymphedema? Thank you.
So I think others could possibly answer this better than me, but we're hoping that some of the data that's being collected across these 100 sites will start to show some of that. And I think it would be interesting to see those treatment registers over time. Maybe there's higher uptake in the early days of a program and lower uptake later. Yeah, so I think I was talking to, now lost him, but was talking about treatment registers in Ghana, and it would be interesting to look at how, engagement with the program has changed over time and what might be the drivers for that. Absolutely. Please go ahead. There's one question here. Thank you.
So I just want to mention that in geographies like in India, Dr. Ashwini Kumar has mentioned, there is a lot of migration is happening. Plus, there are other issues regarding the drug administration. In India, where the block population is approximately 500,000, identification of these never treated population is quite challenging. That is the one thing. Another thing is that whatever DAs are doing the work in the field and the register they are maintaining, those registers are not digitized as of now. So for us, it becomes very challenging, like to get that information, unless until we understand where these people are and how they are spread, what is their demographic profile and other characteristics. I think it's really challenging to customize any social mobilization intervention, which we are piloting in some of the identified geographies in India as of now. But our real challenge is to identify the never treated population. So any insight from other countries would be really helpful to know, like how they have done, identified, and likewise the intervention were done successfully. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Yep. I think hopefully through this afternoon a lot of these things are going to be addressed, and it's really great to hear the on-the-ground experience. I think I'll wrap it up there and give some time to my colleague who's coming next. I did have some extra slides in case you wanted them, but I think one example is probably enough. I'll hand over to Dr. Rajiv, who's presenting next on the operational research on missed populations within an LF program.
Thank you. I think the stage has been set very well with the questions that were really asked. So what we are presenting is an operational research from India in a participatory action research mode, trying to focus on migrants and trying to come with some relevant evidence to prove a couple of research questions, which I'll just share. As was discussed, there are challenges of lymphatic filariasis MDA coverage in India. The general presumption is that migration has a huge role to play on not allowing quality MDAs to actually happen. The program in India aims to control the transmission through MDAs like in other countries. But the coverage of MDAs has been a challenge. Some of our colleagues from India mentioned that. The evidence of this has also been shown because lots of areas have not been able to clear TAS assessment service. The general literature from all over the world claims that short-term and circular migration is an important cause of MDA failure, something that was just mentioned. Though in India migration is a common phenomena, till today there hasn't been any systematic assessment of the real impact of migration on the coverage of the program and also of the prevalence of LF. The area that has been selected is a state called Jharkhand. It's a very highly migratory state from all its districts. This was a state created and carved out from an existing state called Bihar in 2000. It has had multiple rounds of MDA since its creation. Traditionally, this has been a state from where a very large number of population actually migrate out. The migration is both seasonal, is from rural to urban areas, and is from districts within the state to outside the state. Our hypothesis is to actually just confirm what we just mentioned, that there is a significant proportion of people in Jharkhand which remain unattended or uncovered by the program due to migration, and they could be the real cause of continuation of transmission of this disease. The study objectives is to actually identify who's missing MDA and actually see whether these people who are missing MDA are migrants. The aim is to understand who regularly misses it in this state and the focus on migrants' role in continuation of transmission. We hope to involve beneficiaries and programmatic stakeholders, which will eventually advise on how can the MDA design be redesigned to increase access to populations. The research questions that we hope to answer are: who are those populations who are regularly missed in MDAs in this state and why? How do patterns of migration relate to the timing of MDA, and are migrants regularly missed? Is the LF infection higher among migrants versus non-migrants? We hope to actually test a certain number of populations of migrants and non-migrants. What is the knowledge, attitude, and practices around LF-MDA program among migrants versus non-migrants? How could future MDAs be redesigned to increase access and ensure coverage of these populations? And how could the learnings from this study actually be applied to other programmatic settings, and which was something that Molly in her opening presentation also mentioned? And how could the never treated, and who in India government wants to call the missed population, be actually covered? As I mentioned, this would be a participatory action research. We would follow mixed method design. We would have IDIs, FGDs. We would be doing FTS surveys in both the migrants and non-migrant population. We'd be doing KAP studies. And through a workshop, we hope to co-design the strategy with migrants and other stakeholders, from where the tools and the whole research methodology would evolve. 4 sites have been identified, which is a mix of migrant origin and migrant destination sites, and is a mix of rural and urban. In all these 4 sites, and these 4 sites have been determined in discussions with the state government and the central government leadership. In the recent round of MDA, they have had a coverage. A little cluttered slide just trying to show that which populations we would do FGDs in, key informant interviews in, and the FTS testing in. What would be the samples we would be covering? We've discussed this with biostatisticians, and we've come out with the reasons and the basis of the study methodology. We hope that the final selection of the sampling strategy would be after discussions with people at both district and village level. We would map the migrant clusters. Will be done with the help from, again, government officials at the municipality and corporation level. We would try to identify interlocutors like factory owners, managers, and people who really are engaged in ensuring migrant groups migrating to certain areas for certain jobs. The areas of the desired population groups or households will be identified through community workers, and we'll follow a snowball sampling methodology, and we'll also do social mapping to identify them. This is an interesting part. We've had Dr. Ashwini and Dr. Vishal talk about India specifically. When in India, just because of the largeness of our population and the way the government actually leads the entire program implementation, it is absolutely mandatory and it is tremendously beneficial to engage with the government at the absolute design and inception phase. What we're trying to highlight is that we hope that when this study actually comes out with some recommendations and findings, the ownership of this whole process would be actually with the government. Just trying to convey that when we are talking of government in India, possibly like in all other countries, we have the central government, then we have the state governments, then we have governments at the district level, and then we have governments at the block level, and then eventually also some elected representatives at community levels. What we have tried, and when we talk of government, we have the government, which is the ministry which actually leads the entire programming. Dr. Vishal mentioned about data, mentioned about the challenges of the program. And we also have within the government an institution called the Indian Council of Medical Research, which is actually leading all operational implementation research in our country. What we've tried to do is, even though this is a small initiative, COR-NTD has funded us, what we have been able to do is to get approvals from both the Ministry of Health, the Director General of Health Services Office, which actually mandates the supplies and the drugs, and the Indian Council of Medical Research through the Vector Control Research Institute, of which Dr. Ashwini was till very recently the director. Every discussion, every tool, the sampling plans have all been shown to all these government officials, both at the central and the state level. They have not only been just shown, we've received, I would say, a lot of good inputs from them. It's been challenging, getting approvals, getting things on file, at least speaking of from India, is not an easy thing to achieve. But what we do want to report out is that every component of what we are going to be doing is now on file, and so has an opportunity that when the findings come out, the ownership and the influence that the study findings would have on the MDAs and beyond the MDAs has a much higher level. What was a little bit of an additionality that came out from this whole process was that we were told that it is absolutely mandatory for us to get ethical approvals and also approvals from a body which is called the Health Ministers Screening Committee. In India, in today's day and time, data is extremely sensitive with the government. So where we are at this point is we've created the independent ethical clearance body that has approved it, and now we are waiting for the Health Ministers Screening Committee. There were some modifications to the entire process that came out from engaging with the government. Initially, we just wanted to look at migrants overall, but we were advised to look at migrant workers as destination and at site of origin, and also have a comparative non-migrant population. The sample size of estimates of LF prevalence was enhanced to make it robust. As I mentioned, ethical approvals and approvals at the Health Minister's Scientific Committee level was mandated. And as I mentioned, government is not wanting to call them never treated population. They want everybody to call them missed population, which possibly conveys the sentiment of what the government is looking at with regard to this group of population. As I mentioned, engaging with the government is a little bit of a challenge. You need a lot of patience, you need perseverance, but then we hope that the outcome of this study, which COR-NTD has supported us with, will potentially have much larger both programmatic and policy level influence and outcomes. I'd like to thank everybody. I'm left with 3 minutes. Okay. She's saying 1, you're saying 3. But I'm happy to take any questions, and I want to thank the organizers, and especially Molly, to have given us this opportunity. Yes, please.
I like your approach of engaging all the stakeholders from the bottom up, because we tend to ignore that approach, and you come up with results which cannot be implemented by anyone because they don't feel part of the process. So kudos, continue.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Over here. Thank you for your presentation. You know, we keep hearing about country ownership and ownership. In order to own something, you have to contribute, either co-fund or fund itself. For India, they spend a lot of resources on their LF program. So the question is why they need outside institution to do this kind of survey. Shouldn't the government have thought of this themselves a long time ago and funded this themselves? And they would own it and they would improve their own program. Why didn't that happen?
This is a very difficult question to answer on such a platform. I'll try to be politically correct. As I mentioned, there is the institution called the Indian Council of Medical Research, which has different bodies, all engaged in research on a continuum. There is evidence being created through the program, through Ministry of Health, Director General Health Services Office. There is a realization internally that the program has challenges. And when you're talking of 1.4 billion people with all that was mentioned as potentials for never treated populations, it is challenging. I told you that they're not keen on data sharing. And I think the window of opportunity for organizations like us is something that you have to really negotiate. They're not asking us to do research. The government is never conveying for partners or others to come in and look at, do research. On the contrary, it's us who are trying to go in and see how can, because everyone knows that there are challenges. Everyone realizes that, for example, in this state, as was mentioned, it's a very highly migrant state. Apart from that, there are challenges of programs, last mile, equity, quality, etc. So it's not that the government is asking us, it's really we who are trying to request the government to allow us to do all of this. That's the best I can say. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Musa Sangare from Mali, and my presentation will focus on barrier and facilitator related to never treatment during MDA among mobile population in Mali, mobile and migrant population in Mali. So Mali is a country with previously high prevalence of NTD, and at least almost half the population is at risk. So with the introduction of the MDA intervention, we have made significant progress. Trachoma has been eliminated, and now we are progressing toward LF certification. And the only challenge now is schistosomiasis, which is still endemic in many health districts. So the recent history of Mali revealed that there have been multiple groups of population moving because of conflicts and security, because of political insecurity, instability, and also because of economic migration. And these many circumstances lead to thousands of population being displaced. This graph shows here the IDP's displacement from around 2012, that goes to 200,000 people, to 380,000 people in 2022. So this results to overlap of multiple groups of population moving at the same time. Some of these movements are predictable, relating to seasonal change. Others are unpredictable, like IDPs. And this multiplicity of movement has implication for MDA implementation. MDA work best in stable community where people live together and where people stay in one place for most of the year. And we know even with mobile population, it's difficult to deliver routine health care. So we can expect that there will be some people who will have never been even treated during any MDA. So to address this question, we conducted a qualitative exploratory study to understand the barrier and facilitators surrounding never treatment during MDA among mobile and migrant population. We define never treatment as a proportion of population who has never been treated for any MDA in the past. So to aid in their recollection, we show the participant the tablet to distinguish between the entities and also to remind them about the MDA. And over the course of 2 months, we conducted 20 individual in-depth interviews and 12 focus group discussion among our target group in 2 selected health districts, Tomia and Kalawankoro, where we have a high number of IDPs, and internally displaced persons, nomads, and trans-mass elder, and also informal gold and sign minor. So what we found, this slide here shows the reason contributing to non-participation in the last MDA campaign. It emphasized geographic mobility, conflicts, and economic constraint, for which may significantly impact the implementation of MDA. For Tomia, there are more IDPs, which may be why geographic mobility and conflicts and insecurity emerge of higher importance. And for Kalawankoro, thank you. For Kalawankoro, there is more economic migration and more informal miners like informal mining, and that's why economic constraint and geographic mobility may be of higher importance. Excuse me. So this slide highlights the barrier which may result in never treatment among mobile population. So for Tomia, there is more IDPs, and those IDPs may be reluctant to seek treatment because they come from outside the region and can be discriminated by the local community. And for Kalawankoro, due to the high mobility of population, because Kalawankoro is an urban environment, population are not reached by the routine, regular communication channel, and so remain unaware about the MDA campaign. So based on our result, we propose some solution to address never treatment issues among mobile population. So we need to ensure that our approach to MDA is flexible, understanding predictable movement, as well as prepare for potential unpredictable movement, like an influx of IDP into a district. And also, we need to work with other healthcare programs, like immunization program, which may provide more opportunity to learn from their experience in reaching this population. And lastly, we should not treat every mobile population group as the same. For example, a nomad is different than a young economic migrant. So our study has shown that there are multiple barriers to participation which may result in never treatment. In Mali, we have had considerable success in NTD portfolio, and the increasing mobility of different population group is concerning. So we need to rethink how the MDA is carried out in view of these multiple population groups. Finally, we recommend to implement flexible MDA intervention to improve the access of mobile population, and also to tailor community engagement according to the characteristic of the population. We also, additionally, we need innovative research to understand the implementation of this flexible intervention created according to the population. Finally, our results in Mali are likely applicable to other countries in the region where there have been significant movement due to informal mining, nomadism, or economic migration. I would like to thank all our team in Mali, at NIH, and at the University of Ottawa. Merci pour votre participation. Any question?
Thank you for your presentation. So one of your recommendations was community engagement. So I'm curious to know what will be included in community engagement activities and how they will be implemented as well. Thank you.
Well, the problem is not what we should include, but what is the characteristic of the population we are targeting. So if you know what's the characteristic of the population, you can now address the type of communication you have to do. For example, in Mali, if you want to target like informal gold miners, it's better to go through the chief of the village, and they have some association. You can go through this association and tell them that you have the MDA campaign and how they can help you to implement this intervention. And through this way, they may feel more concerning, and then they can eventually participate to the intervention.
Thank you very much for your presentation. What I very much liked is at the end you said there is not just one migration group, and you would have approaches tailored to specific groups. I'm just wondering, for nomadic pastoralists, which are still quite important in Mali, did you consider a One Health approach? So for instance, that you would try to target people when there is treatment or vaccination of animals?
Yeah, definitely. I will recommend One Health approach, and there will be some work going through in Mali on one NTD AVSF. They have a mobile clinic with veterinary and human doctors. They move each month, and they have some local site where they go to target this population. So definitely it's a good opportunity to explore.
Yeah. Since there are multiple groups and there are multiple challenges as well, dealing with these different groups, would you consider bringing in some communication expert or sociological expert to deal with these segments of population what approach actually suits to each of these groups to tailor some specific strategies for them. Is it possible in Mali?
Yeah, I think so. It's possible, but that's why I said it's important to do more innovative research to study the characteristics of the population and also to see how we can implement different strategies according to the characteristics of the population. But that needs to be explored in our next step.
So, thank you. So since you have different groups, one important question is how to implement MDA programs in different groups, taking into consideration the timelines that...
I don't get you.
Taking into consideration the timelines that programs have to implement MDA. So in such a settings where donors and implementers require countries to implement timelines between specific periods.
Yeah.
How then is it going to be feasible to implement specific activity for each migration groups within that particular timelines? Do we have to go outside of those timelines to implement activities?
Okay. For example, in the case of Mali, if you look at the characteristic of the population that we have here, we have informal gold miner, but most of them came after the rainy season to look for money, and at the beginning of the rainy season, they will go back to farm. So if you want to target those populations, it's better to do it at the beginning. It depends on where you want to implement the MDA. If it's in their own villages, it's better to do it during the rainy season. But there is also some challenge because during the rainy season, people go to the farm. So when the distributor comes, they will not find them. So it's really a complex topic, and each country needs to adapt to their population and the season.
Welcome back from the coffee break, everyone, and to those of you online, welcome back. Our next presenter is Dr. Lyamuya from the Ministry of Health in Tanzania.
Yeah, thank you very much. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. As I have been introduced, I'm Faraja Lyamuya from NTD Control Program, Ministry of Health in Tanzania. And I'll be presenting to you the experience that the program has observed among fisheries. Despite several rounds of MDA for LF, the program has identified individuals who have never been treated. So I'm here to share with you our experience on never treatment in programmatic context. The information will be based from fisheries communities in Tanzania. I'm going to highlight how big is the problem, how does it limit our progress in the program, and how can we reach these fishing communities. In Tanzania, we have 7 districts that still require MDA for LF, out of 119 districts ever endemic for LF. All these 7 districts, they are along the coast of Indian Ocean, and on the map there, they are marked with a red color. I'll give an example from one of those 7 districts, and that is Kilwa District. Kilwa district is one of the districts which has struggled with lowering the prevalence of LF enough during pre-TAS so that it can move to the TAS and stop MDA. In 2021, after MDA, we did coverage evaluation survey in this district, and we have found that 33% of participants participated or swallowed the medication in that particular year. In addition, also, we have found that 23% of respondents had never been treated. And the map on the right side is the map of Kilwa, which shows the cluster level results of MDA participation, with the pink color show the proportion of respondents who have never been treated. Now, with the assumption that the fishing communities might be missing during MDA and surveys, we did analysis of never treated by occupation, and we found that fisher folks in this community were 2.6 times more likely being never treated. That value was not significant, but it gave data that could point out this community left out, given that these fisheries also, they were moving or traveling to other districts which also struggled with transmission of LF, with the persistent transmission. Now the two arrows on the map there shows the clusters where we gathered more information or we did more survey to learn more about the never treated individuals. So to understand why the infection was persisting, we did qualitative and quantitative data collection after pre-TAS failure. We did interviews with the district NTD coordinator, fishing camp leaders, community leaders, frontline health workers, community drug distributors, and community members. Also, we included the HIV district coordinator, who also had experience working with the same community. We gathered information on migration and past MDA participation, including never treatment. Also, we did FTS testing from 2 fishing communities and 2 nearby villages. The areas there marked in brown are the sites where we gathered more information about fisheries and nearby communities. And on the map, the areas marked with the green color are the areas where these fisheries are also moving for fishing activities, including the neighboring country in Mozambique. Now, when they were asked about how many times they have participated for MDA, we have found that 69% of participants among fisheries and 43% of participants from nearby villages had never been treated. In the charts above there, they show the distribution of MDA participation by age groups and gender, with the deep blue color showing the proportion of never treated on the right side among the fisheries, on the left side among the participants from the nearby villages. Reported reasons for never treatment were as follows. First is did not know about the drug, and that was pointed out more among fisheries. Second was unaware of MDA, and that one was pointed out more among participants from the nearby communities. Other reasons were they were busy or occupied by the work. Next was they were not present at their homes at the time of the distribution, and the drug distributor did not visit their household. Results of the FTS testing showed that fisheries have high antigenemia positivity compared to the nearby communities. The results are there. It shows that from the first group of fisheries, or the first area, the prevalence was 6.7, and from the second camp, it was 8.7. Comparing to the nearby villages, the first village, the prevalence of LF was 1.9, and in the second village, it was 2.6. Also, we observed that the LF prevalence was higher among never treated, and this was observed in both groups, among fisheries and participants from nearby villages. Among fisheries, the never treated, they had the prevalence of 12.2, and never treated from the participants from the nearby village, they had the percent of 3.7. Now let's look at the qualitative findings. These are some of the qualitative findings that some of the drug distributors, they were leaving the medication at home for the fisheries to take later on. Second, low literacy level in these communities makes the banners and flyers that the program is distributing the poor choice for social mobilization. They were preferring person-to-person education. Also, we learned from other programs that HIV peer educator models has been successful in reaching fishing communities with education, condom distribution, and self-testing. We have been able to improve MDA participation this year in August. These are the number of people reached through post-distribution at the fishing camps and fish markets. These posts were added after the above data were gathered. Below are the reported epidemiological coverage at the health facility catchment area. Now, the key actions to improve MDA. First is to do micro-planning with the fisheries leaders so that they can give us information when to reach them and how to reach them, what are the social mobilization strategies that they would like to be used. Also, to use the boat owners to sensitize the fishing communities, and this to be done early in the morning before the boat launch for the fishing. Third is to increase the number of drug distributors, and among these drug distributors need to be fishermen who also distribute the drug and educate people about MDA. To include the fixed points for MDA in the fisheries camps, at the port, at the coffee, tea stations, and TV stands. Targeted supervision for fisheries area and increased transport resources because some of the areas are the islands. Also to involve the fisheries officers who they work with the fisheries on daily basis. Now, in conclusion, never treated is a problem in remaining hotspot areas in the countries. It delays the countries, it delays the program to reach its elimination target. Second, there is an association of never treated and infection in the areas. Third, never treated information is the signal to investigate more. There's a need to modify MDA to reach this group, including the need of targeted social mobilization strategies and messages for fisheries. Lastly, I'd like to acknowledge the support from USAID Act to End NTD East program through RTI, our headquarters and the country office, also the local government authorities, other sectors and communities that we have worked with. Thank you very much. So you're welcome for the question. Thank you.
This type of work and topic there's nothing more important than this. Because it shows that there needs to be tools other than MDA to eliminate LF. Here, you could have continued MDA for 100 years and never been able to solve the problem that you've identified here. It's unclear whether I hope, good luck, I hope it works, but it's terrific.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's a great work to see that is done within program. And I was just wondering what were some of the challenges you face, especially in integrating the qualitative aspect in the evaluation that you did. And what is your feeling, especially in terms of the program and the partner in taking on board this recommendation? Because I think it's good to produce them, but sometimes we get stuck about the uptake of those recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Faraja, for the very nice, work done in finding out how fishermen are being missed out systematically for MDAs. But my question is to you and to other presenters, how do you identify never treated? Because I've observed in India, it's migrants. In Mali, it's different groups of people. In Tanzania, now you're focusing on the fishermen. Are we missing other migrants? So what is the process of a program to identify what are, never treated people? And then that's one probably to all presenters. But the other question is, now you have recommendations from what you have learned. How are they going to affect the cost of your MDA? Do you have to budget more? Do you have to bring in more resources? What does it take for a program to reach these never treated people? Thank you.
Thank you, Andreas. How can we identify the never treated? The approach that the program used was to add the question of MDA participation in all the surveys that we are doing within the program. The ones that I have presented, these questions were added in coverage evaluation surveys. Also, disease-specific assessment, pre-TAS, also we are adding these questions on MDA participation, including the never treated. That is the one way to identify these individuals. Next, what will it take to the program? Yes, there will be an added cost to modify the MDA strategies. Like for us, we had to increase the number of drug distributors. We had to increase or add the mode of distribution. On top of house-to-house distribution, we had to put the posts in the fishing markets and other areas that we think that we were missing them. Also on the part of the supervision, there needs to be a targeted supervision in these areas. Also, it will increase the cost of transport and human resource.
Yeah. One of the major concerns is when do we undertake the assessment surveys. If the time between the MDA and asking question to the community, there can be a recall bias, if there's a gap is too much. Many times in the marginalized communities which have some benefits from government to get, they tend to give you false information and they want to tell you that, yes, I have consumed. So this is a wonderful question asked by a good friend, that how confident are we that those who say that I have consumed drugs, they have actually consumed. So that's the crux of finding the actual number of never treated or treated. Thank you.
Yes, I think also we take that as an limitation.
And my question is related to identification of never treated population, and you mentioned that you are doing it through surveys, adding this question into the pre-test and other kind of surveys. So my experience working in India is a bit different, because we have done some experiments, social mobilization experiments, and tried to find out population at ground level, at the village level. And if we identify people at the village level, then there are huge variation. Through surveys, whatever we are getting, the never treatment at the province or the state level is around 6 or 7%, or even as high as 15%. But when we go more granular and identify those pockets, the never treatment range is quite high. It ranges from 7% to 45%. So in that scenario, because never treatment population is the population which drives the transmission, so it's equally important not only rely on the surveys, but having done those kind of assessments, maybe in some identified or priority areas, which you can get the information from your MF rates and the coverage to have those areas identified. Because unless we identify those areas, we are not going to achieve that kind of elimination. So that's my comment, and thank you very much for your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I'm given the stop message there. Thank you. Oh.
They're not clapping because I stood up. Lisa Rotundo from RTI. Dr. Faraja, thank you for the presentation. I want to maybe offer one potential solution to the question from our colleague about the directly observed treatment. It's also a plug for a session that will be at ASTMH in a few days. So some of our support for the Haiti LF elimination efforts have involved virtual directly observed treatment, where participants took a selfie video of them actually swallowing the treatment and sent it on. So it's an innovative attempt. Yes, there's more expense, Andreas, but we're leaving no one behind, so that's our goal. My colleague, actually Molly Brady, can probably talk more about the Haiti work too. Yeah, thanks.
Okay. Thank you very much.
No, I think Lisa also already said that we are going to address that, but I observe that you observe not only never treated as a issue, but also the fish, the CDD leaving a drug for fisher who are not at home. I think this is really a big challenge and a big problem. What we are doing with this drug, are we receiving a right dosage and things like that? I think it's very important to tackle also this component. Thank you.
So good afternoon, and thanks for also inviting WHO into this really important session. And the presentations, I think, really highlight this is a critical issue for any strategy that uses mass drug administration and mass treatment. We heard Dr. Sose, our director this morning, talk about cross-cutting initiatives, integration. Now, a lot of the research presented here was for LF, but we know that this is going to be an issue across ONCO, across STH, across Schisto, And this is why WHO feels it's very important, and we would like to give tools to NTD programs to be able to address this. From our Swiss TPH colleagues, we're thankful for this slide, but it's just to show that efficacy is not the same thing as effectiveness. And it doesn't matter how efficacious your intervention is, if you drop in the reach of that intervention, we're going to reduce effectiveness. And coverage matters very clearly. And the math backs it up for us. So we thank Deirdre for her presentation, but even prior to the recent modeling work, when we modeled efficacy of IDA to know how many rounds we were going to need, high systematic non-adherence is effectively never treated. And it's going to require many more rounds. So, coverage matters. We need to address these groups. We've had evidence today presented in Tanzania that those who are never treated had higher antigenemia prevalence, so they're going to sustain transmission. We had a very good discussion and consensus in last year's COR-NTD meeting specifically on this, that we really need to offer something for programs to help them overcome this. And there are some materials developed. We can also take the lessons learned from this research that's ongoing, that's been presented and planned, to put these materials in one place. I think it's important for WHO to be the head name on this, because then we have more countries looking at this. This is what WHO says. This will help us. And we want to have it in a way that's accessible and available to a program manager, instead of taking a huge manual and saying, okay, where do I find this part? I could go to one maybe PDF directly on assessing never treated in the pre-TAS. And we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to use what we've learned in the research and from other programs even outside of NTDs. So the development right now is still ongoing. We're having consultations virtually. We have partners. This is a crowdsourcing, so to speak, among experts and all of you who are doing the research to help put together the chapters and draft the chapters. We want to make sure that it's communicated clearly and is useful, and therefore we need to have peer review and also pilot. And this is recommended in the WHO process for developing normative, non-guideline products, or what we call technical products. So this does give guidance for countries, but it's not something normal that would be put through the Guidelines Review Committee, the GRC process, like a new intervention. I think after we have the comments from peer review and pilot, we need to review that in a final face-to-face consultation and put it together for publication. So our timeline is to be complete by the end of Q2 in 2024, and hopefully we can stick on that timeline. And that would include having the pilot as well. So, and thinking of the proposed content, Andreas, you asked a good question. How do countries identify the never treated? That needs to be in the manual, in the toolkit. Countries need to be able to go and see what was done and what is a best practice that we're learning from these studies. So the ways to measure never treated, the what, the when, the where, and how to collect that information, and then how to use that information on never treated. And then in that middle row there, what actions can be taken? This is what, you know, my desire for this toolkit would be this part here. What are already some of the positive messages we can give programs to have them use or to address communities? And some of this, as we've seen, is going to be setting specific. So there will have to be some work in the beginning in order to get to those messages that are locally relevant. But from what we know already, it needs to be in that chapter. And then we need to be able to look for ways of integration, again, as our director mentioned, and also how to monitor, you know, what improvements are we making. This is one thing that we can look now, and we would like to hear the results of from Tanzania when this is just presented. You know, how much, with these new efforts, how much are we going to improve coverage now that you've done all of this work and you've come up with those recommendations of what you can do in these communities? What's it going to look like? What's the impact of that going to look like? And then most importantly, how do we communicate the importance to decision makers and at the top level? Why we have to continue doing MDA? Do you want to continue to do MDA, MDA, MDA constantly, or is there an endpoint? There's a lot of contributors, and overall, you know, WHO, we're involved. PAHO is involved. They see the same value of this toolkit, and Allison and Molly have been helping lead this work, and several authors, several people involved in drafting of the chapters. So this I see is a community-developed product, not a WHO-developed product. This is coming and will be put out by WHO, but everyone in this community has been involved and is invited, even through this session, to have input into this. So, thanks very much. And Allison, I'll turn over to you. Hopefully no questions for me. That's just...
Great, thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, and thanks that's a great segue, actually, because the conversations that we're going to have now will have the potential to directly influence how we're continuing to develop the toolkit. So the authors will be meeting on Wednesday afternoon, so we will most certainly be considering some of the outputs of the discussions that we're about to have. So thanks to our wonderful speakers. I think we have a lot of really interesting questions that have been percolating, and right now it's time for us to continue the discussions. We are going to encourage everyone to stand up. And what we have a few members that we've voluntold to help us out, who are going to kind of be our moderators at these different Post-it notes that are up on the board. We have 3 specific questions. One is around piloting the Never Treatment Toolkit. Where shall we do it? Any thoughts around that, exploring what that might look like. The second is thinking around current evidence gaps in Never Treatment. You've heard there's been some that have been raised in our conversation, but others that we may have in small discussions. And the third one are the key learnings that we've seen today. How can we apply them to other PCNTDs? We talked a lot about LF, but we need to be thinking, as Jonathan mentioned, more broadly and also beyond, even beyond NTD programs.
We wanted to spend a little bit of time hearing from the facilitators about some high-level notes from their breakouts. So we're going to start over here with Jejam and Group 1. Just a couple of key things that leapt out at you from your breakout group about piloting the toolkit and evaluating the pilot or the toolkit.
Okay, that's a tough one. So 2 questions: where to pilot the toolkit and how to evaluate the toolkit. I'll try and go through as much as quickly as possible, hoping I don't miss everything. So where to pilot the toolkit? We're looking at possibly border areas between countries, Nepal and India, for instance, where there is some evidence of never treatment activity. We looked at rural versus urban areas, areas with multiple rounds of MDA, areas that have failed pre-TAS, areas with low coverage, areas with no reported issues. For instance, yes, there may be no issue in a particular area, but once you go deeper and assess, you soon enough identify that there are challenges. Country ownership is critical. It's important to go beyond LF. For the toolkit, it's important to go beyond LF to OV and the other PC-NTDs, looking at co-endemicity, because implementation of the toolkit is going to vary based on the disease and co-endemicity. Of course, targeting areas with people who are disadvantaged, who are never reached, that's important. Looking at different scenarios with that are most challenging. Those are some of the areas that should also be considered, because then once the toolkit is successful in such cases, you can assume that it will be successful in cases that are less important. Social cultural settings should be taken into considerations. You may have adults versus children, and assessing the question, how to pose the questions would differ in such individuals. In terms of how to evaluate the toolkit, of course, it should be done in a scientific way as possible, which will probably impact the timelines. Should use both qualitative and quantitative approaches, should be multicentric, should involve co-creation with communities and individuals who will be evaluating the toolkit. Gender equity, social inclusivity should be considered in the evaluation of the toolkit. And then very quickly, this is the last one. The cost effectiveness of the toolkit is an important question. And one of the questions that came up was how to measure the impact of the toolkit. And that is linked to whether we are piloting, evaluating, or assessing the impact. Because piloting can be easier, in which case you're looking at just feasibility, acceptability. And for that, the protocols have to be standardized so you can compare between the results from different assessments. And the toolkit should be integrated in program activities. And then finally, we also need to, there was a question on whether we are evaluating double drugs, ivermectin, albendazole, DEC albendazole, or IDA, the triple drugs, because each of those, double or triple, have their own challenges. Very briefly, that's group one.
That's great. It sounds like you had very rich discussions, and I'm looking forward to reading those all. Thank you very much. We can go down, yes, to Ernest, who also talked about piloting the toolkit. Ernest, if there's a few key things you'd like to add.
Yeah, so what I want to add is, as an indicator for where to pilot it, you should also look at data from other diseases. So if an immunization project has data that is showing that there is low coverage in some places, it could be an indicator for you to also implement it for the NTD. So that will be an addition. And then for the evaluation, the addition will be that even after the never treatment has been implemented in a place and you have put in an intervention, it is good to go and do it over so that you have some information about trends, what is happening with that. Then the last point would be that you need to do qualitative studies after never treatment to help you to evaluate the results that you get. But besides that, I think he's mentioned most of the point. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, we'll move to Deidre to talk a little bit about the evidence gaps in OR.
Thank you very much. We had two questions. What are the evidence gaps and where should further research be done? As you can see, we had the best discussion because we made it onto 5 sheets. And they were really grouped around a few themes, one of which was understanding where this is a problem and in which groups. Is it possible to predict it? Can we learn from other diseases, etc.? What are the drivers of this behavior? On learning from other diseases like malaria programs and vaccine programs, other NTDs, there was some discussion saying that could be useful, but also it's very different epidemiology, these different diseases, so there may be different groups that you're interested in, but also different disease programs have different implementation. For example, the distributor may get a per diem versus the distributor being a volunteer, and that may have an impact on where the never treat issues are. We had a little bit of discussion around once you understand where and it is and maybe what the drivers are, how do you actually overcome it? Which is, so once you know you have a problem, how do you overcome it? For example, there were examples that it's a political statement to not take the drug from a particular government, for example. Could there be incentives, either at the individual or the group level, giving food, learning from directly observed treatment in other diseases, for example, supervision by proxy. We had quite a lot of discussions around stigmatizing of these groups, some of the language sensitivities around never treat or hard to reach groups, nomadic groups, etc. And then that in a way was tied back to this issue of how much can you summarize from one village across a district, what your issues might be. A lot of discussions around how important is this and how it varies by disease. Can we quantify the benefits of actually identifying these individuals and treating them? How many rounds are you going to have to continue to treat them, depending on the disease that you're dealing with? So I think that captures most of it, but there is more here, so everybody come and have a look later.
Thank you very much. And Alison, sorry to make you get your steps in
like
today,
Vanna
but
White.
We'll go to Diana next for a few key points to add.
That's pretty fun. You're not going to take it away. Okay, thank you. We had same topic as Deirdre, but a bit of a different conversation. I think in the wake of the 3 presentations that were given, there was a real interest in trying to understand, and it's an investigation that take place, is how do we identify the special groups that constitute NT populations in different contexts. We saw a presentation from Tanzania where these groups were from fisheries, in Mali where they were migrants, and India where it was a smattering across. So how exactly do we unearth that? I'm going to jump around a little because things came up as we talked. There was a suggestion in relation to that maybe the toolkit should include a set of questions that program managers can ask to unearth context in relation to that. And then jumping back up again, there should be work done on building differential strategies depending on who those never treated groups are. Okay. Separate issue. There is an interest in investigating the correlation between never treated and persistent and recrudescent infection. So that's kind of borrowing on language from the trachoma. But in the LF context, say we know what persistent means. I guess we tend to call it hotspots, repeated failure of pre-TAS and say TAS1. And with recrudescence, it might be you pass pre-TAS and TAS1, but fail TAS2, TAS3. We haven't had that happen in ACT West, but those are the contexts. So it could be that the idea is that you could do your research in those areas. So in places that are LF hotspots where they've repeatedly failed at pre-TAS, you kind of focus your never treated research there to follow them over time and see if there's a correlation and take repeated measurements of infection.
Diana, I'm going to stop you there just because of time. But thank you. I know. I don't want to keep
the best was still to come.
Okay, go ahead.
Just one more, maybe, because I like this one a lot, that we've thus far really kind of hemmed in our investigation in terms of never never treated and transmission. But should it just be as discrete as never treated? What about if you've been treated once in the distant past, or 2 times or 3 times? Where is that cutoff where transmission starts mattering? Is it just never treated, or is there somewhere in the continuum where it starts to matter? And then just one other thing I'll say is there was a broad recognition that the surveys were suggesting, pre-task coverage surveys, are definitely imperfect instruments to give a representative picture of never treated. Obviously, on the other end of the spectrum, treatment registers would be it, but we already had discussions on the difficulty of doing that. Like longitudinal registers on treatment are hard to administer and maintain. So what do we do about that?
Thanks. And Marta, we'll move to you for the questions on learnings and how we can share these with other programs.
So, for the learnings, there were some important that all the groups highlighted. First of all, that it is feasible to do for programs. That is very important to engage communities, especially they mentioned community ownership, acceptance, sustainable, and awareness. That is key for the process. That this needs to be translated into, the lessons learned need to be translated into health systems, universal health framework to make this sustainable, and somebody mentioned resilient health systems. And one important thing is planning and communication are essential, especially micro-planning and using qualitative tools. And that interventions need to be contextualized. And for the second part of the question, how to translate this into other programs, there was one that was commented, that was creating a common planning, micro-planning, and communication platform with other programs, especially at the district level.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Vishal, who also had a group about learnings and communicating with other disease programs.
Yeah, so in my station, most of the group members, they have opined that these learning, they are contextual, and we need to adapt to those learnings, because one size fitting in every community is not the solution, but we have to tailor our intervention. And from learning from the never treatment, one of the key message was to identify specific behavior that are relevant to one particular community, and then profiling of those communities, because different communities, they have their own practices, social behavior. So understanding those behavior and what kind of services they are taking and how those services are being supplied from the health facility kind of scenarios, those are really important to understand. And also doing secondary data analysis, they have said that it is important to understand the holistic overview of health system in their areas. And then identification of key service points, for example, community clinics is one good intervention where we can have some telemedicine intervention where not only for NTDs or LF, they can also talk about other diseases as well, and it will add value in terms of scalability as well. And one point was highlighted, like establishing patient support groups, because patient support groups, they not only create that kind of awareness within the community, but they are real advocate and the champions for whole community as well. Because if somebody is suffering from an LF and they go to within the community and tell them, look, this has happened to me, and this was because I never took this drug, and then they percolate the same messaging within their own community. And other point was establishing healthy behavior checklist. That was the suggestion, like within a family, like what kind of program they are availing, what kind of services they are availing, and if we can have good intersection with different program, then I think it will make sense within the family. And targeting adult males who are not at home at the time of drug administrator visit, those could be targeted, because not only they are missed for LF program, but for other multiple program, for example, family planning, and likewise. And the final comment was from one group, like involving other departments, for example, livelihood mission, integration with the other program, for example, a Panchayati Raj institution at the local level, and then the public distribution system. If we can percolate some of the key information within those groups, not only this LF, but other disease-specific areas, then I think that was one recommendation. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I want to thank all the facilitators for Guy and all of you for these rich discussions. We really appreciate it. I'm going to turn it over to Allison now to do a very quick wrap up and close out of the session.
Thanks, Molly. And I see I have dwindling time, so I will be fast. So thanks, everybody. Hopefully, certainly what I listened to, an extremely rich discussion this afternoon. And I think I'll just highlight sort of a 30,000-foot view of what I heard and some of the discussions and points moving forward. Where clearly these are endgame issues. We're talking about massive complexity. And we just need to listen to Mali and Tanzania talk about the complexity of what they see in those populations and what we're understanding is going to come out of the Indian study. I think we can go back to what Dr. Sose encouraged us this morning about having courage to beat the status quo. We need to think about our MDA programs differently in this complex environment and endgame. We need to think differently. We need to be flexible, more innovative in our approaches. And I think we're hearing some of the outcomes of research that's being done in those areas. We also need to think about what kind of new innovations we can create or think about also to address old issues like DOT. We need to enforce DOT, but maybe we need to think about new ways to do that because it's so important. Certainly when we think about that one, the example between reported coverage and surveyed coverage was massive in the Tanzanian example. And so thinking about an innovative way to encourage DOT. Secondly, first, I just have 4 things I want to highlight. We know we can detect never treatment through our routine assessments. We know it's not perfect, but we know it can give us a signal. And that signal can allow us to decide what to do next. And that's really what the toolkit hopefully is going to do, is to say, okay, you have a signal, now what? And to hopefully guide programs and program implementers to say, okay, what questions do I need to ask in that contextual environment? I have to put my glasses on, my handwriting's too small. Second of all, we know that never treatment needs to be addressed at the granular level. Looking at it at a state level or a district level or a province level gives us a false indication of reality. And so by putting it in those routine instruments that we use in programs, adding an additional question doesn't cost anything, and it allows us to look at that lower level. Secondly, we heard about the importance of some specific approaches, the value of social research, microplanning, integration with other public health programs. These have been shown to help us to address people who've been never treated, and hopefully with the OR that COR is currently supporting, we'll continue to see some of the outcomes of that research. Thirdly or fourthly, I'm not sure what number I'm on, government ownership and the importance of government ownership in this issue. And the modeling data can be a really important tool for us to demonstrate to programs when you have a certain level of never treatment, this is how many rounds you're looking at in terms of future commitments potentially for your MDA. We also heard about the importance of engaging them along the process, identifying those who are missed or never treated, and also engaging them in the solutions. One missing piece of information is the cost. We know that the cost up front to address never treatment may be more expensive, but over the long run, we may actually save money. But this is research that hasn't been done yet, and it would make a ploy that hopefully that comes out in some of our recommendations. And finally, I think 3 years ago, we started this conversation around, in December of 2020, we kind of started a more intensive look at this. And it's just been absolutely incredible to see the amount of work that members in this room have done. Implementing programs, countries are including this question in routine data assessments, which is allowing us to get more information on this issue. So I think it's a tribute to everyone in this room and online and lots of other people who've really engaged with this and are bringing it forward now in the implementation of the toolkit. Finally, ASTMH. There's quite a few posters. I'm looking at Luke and Wilma Stolk have one. I know Rogers has one. I can't find you in the room. I know Musa has one. Molly and I have a symposium also on never treatment with Gavi. So there's a few, if you are staying for ASTMH, this is a question that moves beyond the NTD programs, and so it's really important for us to engage in this wider conversation as well. So with that, thank you very much. Thank you to all our speakers.